This is a lesson on the divided kingdom, what many people find to be the most confusing and frustrating part of the Bible. We will not be able to go over the entire period or tell you about every important thing that happens or every important person. Instead, our goal here is to give you a framework for thinking about these events, how they are interconnected, and what they can tell us, a time when Israel's political power was at its zenith in the ancient world. Now first, let's frame these events. King David united the nation, and he was the first king, King David. His son Solomon built the Lord's temple in Jerusalem, but after Solomon, the nation split into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Israel was ruled by a series of bad kings for about 200 years until it was finally defeated by the Assyrians. Judah survived for a century and a half longer before Jerusalem and the temple were both destroyed by the Babylonians and the nation was led into exile. And if we're framing these events, we can also locate other nations that will enter into this story. When you hear of the Syrians, by the way, think Damascus, and Damascus, if it was on the map, it could be shown on this map here in the upper right. When you hear of the Assyrians, think of Nineveh. That's further off to the east in modern-day Iraq. Modern-day Iraq is also where you'd find Babylon, and when you hear the Babylonians, think of the city of Babylon. But our focus is on the people of God. What does this period tell us? What can this period of time tell us about God's plan for salvation, God's plan for saving us, for saving the world? And this can be difficult to tease out because the history is confusing. There's lots of names and dates and battles, and if you look at the names, you'll notice that several of them are repeated, and that certainly does not help. We will focus, to make things a little easier, we'll focus on 5 kings each from the north and from the south. This is in the 9th century BC. There are other important kings too. I'm especially thinking of good King Hezekiah and good King Josiah. They're later on in the southern kingdom of Judah. You can read all about these and other leaders in 1st and 2nd Kings and 2nd Chronicles. Those texts deal with kings and queens, and I should notice that when we say queens, we are typically referring to the queen mother, not the wife of the king, but the mother of the ruling monarch. And that is the normal pattern in the ancient world. Kings would be assumed to have multiple wives, but only one mother. Now that said, there are women who exercise political authority in this story. We will highlight 2 of them. And this is also a story about prophets who pass along God's word, and priests at work in the temple in Jerusalem, and that of course is in Judah. And we'll start, however, not in Judah, but in the northern kingdom of Israel. We have 5 kings there: Omri, Ahab, Ahab's wife Jezebel, Ahaziah, Joram, and Jehu. Omri came to power after a series of violent coups. He moved the capital of the northern kingdom to Samaria and then left his son Ahab in power. Ahab married Jezebel, a Phoenician, and we understand this to be a political marriage. Ahab was succeeded by his son Ahaziah, who reigned only for a short time. After Ahaziah died, he was succeeded by his younger brother Joram. Omri's entire family line was then wiped out by an extremely bloody coup instigated by the general Jehu. And more interesting than any of these 5 kings are the prophets at work in the north. These prophets include Elijah and Elisha. And there were other prophets at the time too, names you'll recognize: Amos, Jonah, and Hosea. This would be a more interesting lesson if we were to focus on the holy prophets instead of the bad northern kings. Unfortunately, that's not our focus here. Many of the events, though, that I'll allude to are the fulfillment of prophecies. So we have the event twice, once as a prophecy and then once as a fulfillment of that prophecy. Elijah, on the left there, is most famous of all the prophets. He's famous for confronting the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel and for being carried into heaven in a chariot of fire. Both Elijah and Elisha raised a young boy back to life. The kings in the south include Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, Ahaziah, Queen Athaliah, and Joash. If you feel like some of these names are being repeated, they are. Now, in general, the line of succession is simpler in Judah. From 2 Samuel 7, we know that there will be an heir of David always on the throne. And good King Jehoshaphat is succeeded by his son Jehoram, who is succeeded by his son Ahaziah. But But when Ahaziah is killed, he is replaced by his mother Jehoram's wife Athaliah. Now order is then restored when Athaliah is replaced by Ahaziah's son, her grandson, Joash. Now I promised you a lot of names, and here they are. Now Jehoshaphat is the best of all of these. Ahab is probably the worst, although there is some competition there. Jehu is the bloodiest. Which one of these 10 kings and queens here is the best at helping us understand the divided kingdom? The answer? None of the above. It's this guy, Ithabal of Zidon, a Phoenician. Why? Well, Ithabal is Jezebel's father. And Jezebel convinces Ahab not only to allow idolatry in the north, but even to erect a major temple to Baal in Samaria. And Jezebel does many other very sick and evil things too. One example, a famous example, is she frames an innocent man, Naboth, and kills him so that Ahab can steal his vineyard. But in terms of political history, we are more interested in the alliance that Ahab makes with good King Jehoshaphat in the south. These two join forces to fight off the Syrians, and there they are. Also on this map, look at Phoenicia up on the upper left. That's Jezebel's home, and by the way, Mount Carmel, where Elijah defeated the prophets of Baal, is in the northwest corner of this map. That's on the Mediterranean coast, and Jezebel persecutes the prophet Elijah. The alliance, though, does not work out very well for Ahab. He goes into battle in disguise. There's a prophecy, of course. He goes into battle in disguise, but is killed by an arrow shot at a venture. An arrow shot without even being aimed. Next, Ahab's son Ahaziah also teams up with Jehoshaphat, and this time they are fighting with Edom against Moab. This goes a little bit better for the northern king, but then Ahaziah falls from his palace roof and never recovers. Back in the south, Jehoshaphat is succeeded by the murderous Jehoram. He allows idolatry, and even worse, he marries Ahab and Jezebel's daughter. That's the future ruler Athaliah. It's getting interconnected here. Joram of Judah then dies from painful stomach illnesses and is succeeded by his son Ahaziah of Judah. So we pause now in the middle of the 9th century BC to notice how many of the rulers of Israel and Judah are either children or in-laws or grandchildren of Ithabal. The answer? All of them. So who wins when Israel fights Judah? Baal always wins when Israel and Judah fight. Back in the north, young Ahaziah is replaced by his brother Joram. He allies himself with Ahaziah of Judah, his nephew, to battle Damascus. Joram is wounded in this fighting, and at this time a captain named Jehu. Jehu is commanded to destroy the house of Ahab, and that's exactly what he does. Jehu kills King Joram of Israel in the same vineyard that his father Ahab had stolen from Naboth. Jehu then goes on to kill King Ahaziah of Judah and the queen mother Jezebel. He massacres anyone associated with Ahab, along with hundreds of priests of Baal. Jehu's bloodbath is disturbing. It's not fun reading, it's disturbing, and it is certainly not God's choice. But how else could Ithabal be erased from this royal lineage? This is the lineage that leads to Jesus, after all. And Ithabal's not out of the lineage yet. With her son dead, Athaliah then moves in to kill other claimants to the throne and seizes power. Ahaziah's youngest son, however, Joash, is rescued and hidden in the temple. And then, 7 years later, the high priest Jehoiada is able to oust Athaliah and install the new king. And yes, that's bloody also. So it seems now that we might have a chance for peace, because it seems like Joash could be another good king. But when priest Jehoiada dies, Joash falls into idolatry. He even goes so far as to kill the next high priest, Zechariah, who is Jehoiada's son, in the temple. So in conclusion, this experiment from Israel's political power, and we have several centuries more of divided history, divided kingdom history to get through, but we can already say that we can see how things are going here. The conclusion is the experiment of Israel's political power is a failure. The kings prove themselves unfaithful to God and cruel to their brothers. And this twisted path, this twisted connected path of children, and parents and murderers and victims demonstrates that a merely political Messiah cannot secure the peaceful reign that God promised the seed of David. A merely political Messiah cannot turn Israel into the worldwide blessing that God had promised the seed of Abraham to be. Let us now, then, fast forward the story 1,000 years to the time of the Herodian dynasty, a new dynasty in Palestine. The temple has been destroyed and rebuilt and desecrated and reconsecrated again, and another group is confident that peace can be found through a strong political leader. But let's listen to what our Lord tells them from the words of Jesus, recorded in Matthew chapter 23, starting at verse 29. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and garnish the sepulchres of the righteous, and say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Wherefore ye be witnesses unto yourselves that ye are the children of them that killed the prophets. Fill ye up the measures of your fathers. You serpents, you generation of vipers, how can you escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send unto you prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them you kill and crucify, and some of them you scourge in the synagogues and persecute them from city to city, that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, whom you slew between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you that kill the prophets and stone them that are sent to you, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathers her chicks under her wing, but you would not. Behold, your house is left unto you desolate, for I say unto you, you shall not see me henceforth till you shall say, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. And that is the final word, that is the judgment on the divided kingdom.